If the truth was buried 30 years ago, why does the forest still remember? The question had haunted Clara Whitmore since she was a child, standing in her mother's quiet kitchen, staring at a photograph of her father in a flannel jacket, smiling beneath towering pines somewhere north of the state line. Now, at 28, standing at the edge of the restricted forest zone, with a cold October wind slipping beneath her field jacket, she felt that same question pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The sign at the dirt access road read Federal Ecological Survey. Authorized personnel only, but the paint was peeling and the chain across the entrance had been cut long ago. 30 years of silence had turned this place into rumor, and rumor into myth. Clara adjusted the strap of her equipment pack and stepped past the sign, boots crunching over gravel. Her team's SUV parked a quarter-mile behind her where the road ended. The air smelled different here, sharper somehow, like rain before a storm, even though the sky was clear and pale blue. Her tablet flickered as she activated the mapping program. Satellite overlays glitched for a split second before correcting themselves, as if the coordinates resisted being pinned down. Core sector, her father had called it in the margins of his old leather-bound notebook, the one her mother had kept hidden in a cedar chest for 3 decades. She had memorized every word in that notebook, especially the last line written in hurried ink. If they find the core, war will begin again. She had been 8 years old when he disappeared, old enough to remember the sound of the screen door slamming behind him, not old enough to understand why no one ever found his truck. The official report said lost during a private survey, presumed dead after a flash flood, but the soil samples in his notes told a different story, readings that spiked in ways no ordinary land should. Clara knelt and pressed her gloved hand against the forest floor. The ground felt warm despite the chill in the air, and for a fleeting second she imagined she could feel a pulse beneath the roots and fallen leaves. A gust of wind stirred the canopy overhead, sunlight fracturing into shards across the clearing ahead, and her tablet screen flashed red before going dark. That's not possible, she murmured under her breath, tapping the screen, but the device remained unresponsive. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a low vibration moved through the air, not a sound exactly, more like the hum of distant power lines carried on the wind. Clara's breath caught as she looked up toward a natural rock formation half a mile ahead, a ring of ancient stone rising like a broken crown from the earth. She recognized the shape from a sketch in her father's notebook, drawn in careful detail with the caption, "The core is alive." A chill traveled down her spine, not from fear, but from recognition. He had stood here once. He had seen this. And whatever he discovered in this forest had been important enough to protect, even if it meant vanishing without a trace. Clara took a slow step forward, unaware that beyond the ridge, hidden among shadowed trees, another presence had felt the forest awaken the moment her boots crossed into forbidden ground. The vibration moved again, subtle but unmistakable, like the low hum of a generator buried beneath layers of soil and stone, and Clara felt it through the soles of her boots before she heard anything at all. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her gloves, eyes fixed on the ring of rock ahead as sunlight flickered across its surface in irregular pulses, almost like a signal struggling to break through static. She took a cautious step forward, then another, her breathing steady but shallow, every instinct sharpened by the quiet that had settled over the forest. Even the wind seemed to hold back, as if waiting. When she reached the outer edge of the formation, she noticed faint markings etched into the stone, weathered but deliberate, spiraling patterns that mirrored the sketches in her father's notebook with unsettling precision. She traced one groove with her fingertips and felt warmth radiate outward, not burning, not painful, just present, as though the stone recognized the contact. "You were here," she whispered, imagining her father kneeling in this same spot 3 decades earlier, pencil tucked behind his ear, eyes bright with discovery instead of fear. A sudden crackle burst from the dead tablet in her hand, and the screen flashed alive without warning, lines of corrupted data streaming across it in rapid sequence. Coordinates shifted, recalculated, then locked into a single point directly beneath the center of the stone. Ring. Clara's pulse quickened. Beneath. She stepped carefully into the center of the formation, boots pressing into soft earth, and the humming intensified, resonating through her chest like an echo of her own heartbeat. For a moment she hesitated, aware that crossing this invisible threshold meant more than a scientific breakthrough. It meant stepping into whatever secret had erased her father from the world. She knelt and brushed aside leaves and loose soil until her fingers struck something smooth and metallic. Buried only inches below the surface lay a small cylindrical container, sealed and worn by time. Her breath caught as she lifted it free, recognizing the faded initials carved into the cap, T.W. The air seemed to tighten around her, every sense focused on the object in her hands. She twisted the cap slowly, half expecting it to resist, but it loosened with a soft click, revealing a rolled strip of waterproof paper tucked inside. With careful fingers she unrolled it and read the single line written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. The core chooses who it answers. If you are reading this, you are part of it now. Clara felt the ground tremble faintly beneath her knees, not violent, not destructive, but aware, and a sudden awareness settled over her as well, the unmistakable sensation that she was no longer alone. Somewhere beyond the circle of stone, hidden among towering pines and deep shadow, a pair of silver eyes watched without blinking, measuring her presence not as an intruder, but as something far more complicated. The forest had not rejected her. It had responded. And in that response, something ancient had awakened on both sides of a fragile peace that had lasted 30 years. The awareness did not fade. It deepened, settling into Clara's bones like a second pulse layered beneath her own. And as she remained kneeling within the stone circle, the air shifted again, not colder but heavier, charged with an invisible gravity that made the small hairs along her arms stand on end. She folded the strip of paper carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket, her mind racing through questions she could not yet frame into logic. The core chooses who it answers. If that was true, then the reaction was not random, not environmental interference or electromagnetic anomaly. It was selective. It had responded to her. A soft crunch of pine. Needles echoed from beyond the clearing, subtle but deliberate, and Clara lifted her head slowly, every scientific instinct urging caution even as something deeper urged her not to run. Between the trees, a tall figure stepped forward into filtered sunlight, moving with quiet control that did not disturb a single branch. He was dressed in dark clothing that blended with the forest shadows, his posture straight, shoulders squared, presence unmistakable even from 30 yards away. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, yet the space around him felt defined, as if the forest itself acknowledged his authority. His hair was dark, brushing the collar of his coat, and when he raised his gaze to meet hers, she saw eyes unlike any she had ever seen in her life, silver not in color alone but in depth, reflective and steady, like polished steel beneath moonlight. Clara's breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition she could not explain. He did not look surprised to find her there. If anything, he looked as though he had expected her. The humming beneath the earth softened, stabilizing, and she slowly rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her knees, refusing to appear smaller than she felt. "You should not be here," he said, his voice calm and even, carrying across the clearing without effort. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. Clara lifted her chin slightly. "Neither should the kind of energy I just measured," she replied, steady despite the rapid rhythm in her chest. For a long moment, they simply regarded one another, the distance between them charged with unspoken history neither had fully uncovered. His gaze flickered briefly toward the stone circle, then back to her pocket where the folded paper rested, and something unreadable passed through his expression. "The forest does not react to strangers," he said quietly. "It reacts to blood." The word lingered in the air, heavy with implication but free of menace. Clara felt her pulse echo the vibration beneath the soil and realized with startling clarity that this man was not merely observing the forest. He was connected to it. The silence stretched, fragile yet electric, as wind finally moved through the trees again, scattering light across the clearing in shifting patterns. Whatever fragile peace had held this place for 3 decades had just shifted, not because of aggression or invasion, but because 2 legacies had collided within the same circle of ancient stone, and neither of them could walk away unchanged. The word blood lingered between them long after the wind carried his voice away, and Clara felt the implication settle into her thoughts with unsettling precision. She had come searching for data, for soil anomalies and electromagnetic irregularities, yet nothing in her training had prepared her for a man who spoke of the forest as though it possessed memory and judgment. She studied him carefully, cataloging details the way she always did when faced with the unknown. Approximately 6 feet, 3 inches tall, controlled posture, measured breathing, eyes that never once broke contact with hers. There was discipline there, and restraint. "What does that mean?" she asked evenly. His gaze shifted briefly to the ground at the center of the stone circle, then back to her face. "It means your father stood where you were standing," he replied. The world seemed to narrow to that single sentence. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. "You knew him?" It was not a question. He did not hesitate. Thomas Whitmore did not stumble into this place by accident. Her breath caught. 30 years of unanswered questions condensed into a single, fragile thread between them. "Then tell me what happened to him," she said, and this time there was no attempt to soften her tone. The man stepped closer, closing half the distance, but still respecting the invisible boundary of the stone ring. Up close, the silver of his eyes was even more striking, reflecting light in a way that felt almost otherworldly, yet undeniably human. "Your father discovered the core," he said quietly. "He understood what it was before anyone else. He understood what it could become if the wrong hands reached it." Clara's fingers brushed unconsciously against the pocket where the note rested. He wrote that finding it would start another war. The man inclined his head slightly. He was right. A faint tremor moved beneath their feet again, subtle but present, and Clara realized the vibration had not intensified since his arrival. It had steadied, as though acknowledging his presence as much as hers. "Who are you?" she asked at last. For a moment he said nothing, and in that silence she sensed the weight of a title larger than a name. "My name is Adrian Blackwood," he answered. The name landed, with quiet gravity. Clara had heard it before, not in official reports, but in rumors whispered at conferences and buried within classified ecological disputes along the Northern Territories. A protector, a negotiator, a leader whose existence was never publicly confirmed. "You are not just observing this forest," she said softly. "You are guarding it." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that felt almost like regret. "I am protecting a peace that has already begun to fracture," he replied. Clara swallowed, the pieces aligning with terrifying clarity. If her father had known him, if her father had chosen silence to prevent conflict, then his disappearance was no random tragedy. It was connected to this place, to this man, and to a fragile balance that now trembled beneath her feet. "If my father knew the truth," she said carefully, "then someone else did too." Adrian held her gaze, and the forest seemed to lean inward around them. "Yes," he said, and not everyone agreed with his choice. The forest seemed to exhale after his last words, and Clara felt the weight of them settle into her chest with a quiet, steady pressure that was far more unsettling than any raised voice could have been. Not everyone agreed with his choice. The implication threaded through her thoughts, pulling at memories of sealed files, unanswered calls, and the way her mother had stopped speaking about Thomas Whitmore as though silence itself were protection. "You are telling me my father made an agreement," she said slowly, watching Adrian's expression for the smallest shift, "and that someone wanted it broken." Adrian did not deny it. He stepped fully into the edge of the stone circle now, close enough that she could see the faint tension along his jaw, not from fear, but from restraint. "Your father believed coexistence was possible," he said. "He believed knowledge did not have to become conquest." The words resonated with everything Clara had built her career around, the belief that discovery could serve understanding instead of dominance. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you believe that?" A flicker crossed his eyes, something deeper than caution. "I have to," he answered. The simplicity of the statement carried a gravity that felt personal rather than political. Another tremor moved beneath the earth, softer this time, almost like a response to the honesty in his voice. Clara glanced, down at the ground, then back up at him. "If my father chose to protect this place, why did he disappear?" The question had lived inside her for 30 years, and speaking it aloud felt like stepping on a fragile ice. Adrian held her gaze without hesitation. "He did not vanish because of the forest," he said. "He vanished because others saw the core as leverage." The word leverage sharpened the air between them. Clara imagined research grants turned into military interest, energy potential twisted into territorial claims. From my world, she asked. From both, Adrian replied. A distant rustle echoed beyond the trees, subtle but intentional, and Clara noticed Adrian's posture shift almost imperceptibly, his shoulders angling slightly, as if listening to a frequency she could not detect. You are not the only one who knows you are here, he said calmly. Her pulse quickened. My team is half a mile back, she said automatically, though she knew he was not referring to them. Not them. His voice remained level, but there was an edge of urgency beneath it now. There are those who believe your presence confirms what they have suspected for years. Clara's thoughts raced. If factions existed within his world, then the fracture he mentioned was already widening. You think they will see me as a threat, she said. They will see you as proof, Adrian corrected. The forest quieted again, and Clara understood with sudden clarity that her arrival had not simply reopened an old mystery. It had activated dormant tensions on both sides of an invisible boundary. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the folded note, holding it between them. He wrote that the core chooses who it answers, she said. Why would it answer me? Adrian looked at the paper, then back at her face, and for the first time uncertainty touched his expression. Because, he said carefully, some legacies are not accidents. The words lingered in the clearing, and Clara felt the ground hum beneath her once more, not in warning, but in recognition, as though something ancient had been waiting for this exact moment, for her to stand within the circle and ask the questions no one else had dared to answer. The hum beneath the earth deepened, not louder but steadier, as though whatever ancient force slept beneath the stone circle had made a decision of its own, and Clara felt that decision ripple through her pulse in a way she could not categorize as purely physical. Adrian's gaze shifted past her shoulder for a fraction of a second, his attention tuned to movements she could not yet detect, and when his eyes returned to hers there was no panic in them, only calculation. We do not have much time, he said quietly. The words were calm, but they carried weight. Clara resisted the instinct to look over her shoulder. Then tell me what I need to know, she replied, holding his stare. If this is about legacy, if this is about blood, then explain it. Adrian took one measured step closer, close enough now that the space between them felt deliberate rather than accidental. Your father learned that the core is not simply energy, he said. It is responsive. It amplifies intent. In the wrong hands, it would not power cities. It would shift balances. Clara absorbed that slowly. Shift balances how? He did not hesitate. Between species. Between governments. Between those who believe dominance ensures survival and those who believe restraint does. The implication settled heavily into her thoughts. If the core magnified intent, then whoever controlled it would not merely control power. They would control direction. A faint echo moved through the trees again, this time accompanied by a subtle vibration in the air itself, almost like pressure building before a thunderstorm. Clara felt it against her skin. You said others suspected, she pressed. What do they think my presence means? Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. There are factions who believe your father shared more than he admitted, he said. They believe he may have passed knowledge to someone who would return. Clara's mind flashed to the notebook, to the deliberate way Thomas Whitmore had documented everything, yet hidden the most critical page within a sealed container beneath stone. He did not tell me anything, she said softly. Not directly. Adrian's eyes searched her face, as if measuring truth not by words, but by something deeper. Knowledge does not always pass through conversation, he replied. Sometimes it passes through inheritance. The word inheritance landed differently than blood had. Clara felt the ground tremble again, and this time she did not flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, focusing on the vibration, allowing herself to feel it fully. It was not chaotic. It was rhythmic, responsive. When she opened her eyes, Adrian was watching her with a look that bordered on recognition. It answers you, he said, more to himself than to her. It never answered anyone else that way. A realization formed slowly, unsettling and profound. Not even you, she asked. For the first time, something unguarded flickered across his expression. I can calm it, he admitted, but I cannot awaken it. The forest shifted again, and this time Clara sensed it too, a subtle tightening of space beyond the clearing. as if unseen observers had drawn closer to the boundary of the stone ring. Adrian's voice lowered, not in secrecy, but in urgency. "If they see what just happened," he said, "they will not interpret it as coincidence." Clara felt the weight of choice settle into her chest. "Then what do they interpret it as?" she asked. Adrian held her gaze, silver eyes unwavering. "As a sign that the balance has chosen sides." The balance has chosen sides. The words did not echo, yet they reverberated inside Clara's chest with the force of a verdict. For a moment, she forgot the rustle in the trees, forgot the unseen presence gathering beyond the clearing, and focused only on the steady vibration beneath her boots. "Sides imply opposition," she said carefully. "I did not come here to choose one." Adrian's gaze did not waver. "Intent does not always matter," he replied. "Perception does." The air felt thinner now, charged with awareness. Clara sensed movement beyond the tree line, not visible, not overt, but undeniably coordinated. Whoever watched was waiting for a signal. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself the way she had before high-pressure presentations and federal review panels. Data first, reaction second. "If they believe the core responded to me," she said, "then they believe I can influence it." Adrian inclined his head slightly. "Yes. And if they believe that," she continued, "then they will not want me walking freely back to my world with that knowledge." Silence followed, heavy but honest. He did not deny it. A distant crack of a branch sounded, closer this time, and Clara noticed Adrian shift half a step to her side, not shielding her, not claiming authority over her position, but aligning with it. The gesture was subtle, yet deliberate. "You could leave now," he said quietly. "Return to your team before assumptions solidify." Clara almost laughed, not from amusement, but from the absurdity of the suggestion. After this, she gestured faintly toward the stone circle. "My father disappeared because he tried to protect this place. You think I can just walk away and pretend it is an anomaly in the soil?" Adrian's eyes softened, though the rest of him remained composed. "Walking away would not erase what you have already activated." Another tremor moved through the ground, and this time Clara felt something new within it, not just rhythm but awareness directed toward her. The sensation was not hostile. It was expectant. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat and let herself feel it fully. The core was not pushing her. It was waiting. When she opened her eyes again, her voice was steadier than she felt. "You said you can calm it," she said, "but you cannot awaken it." "That is correct." "Then maybe it does not need awakening," she replied softly. "Maybe it needs understanding." Adrian studied her, as if reassessing a variable in an equation he thought he had solved. The rustling beyond the trees grew faintly louder, no longer random but synchronized, like multiple footfalls adjusting position. Clara sensed tension building, not in aggression but in expectation of confrontation. "If they confront us," she asked, "what will you do?" Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "I will not allow fear to dictate the future of either world." It was not a threat. It was a promise. Clara felt something shift inside her then, a recognition that this was no longer solely about her father or her research. It was about narrative, about who would define what this moment meant. She lifted her chin slightly. "Then do not let them define me as a weapon," she said. Adrian's silver eyes held hers, unwavering. "Then stand beside me," he replied, "not as leverage, but as choice." And in the tightening circle of unseen watchers, with the forest humming beneath their feet and 30 years of buried truth rising toward the surface, Clara realized that neutrality was no longer safety. It was silence, and silence had already cost her once. The unseen circle tightened, not with open hostility but with unmistakable scrutiny, and Clara felt the weight of dozens of silent judgments pressing in from beyond the tree line. She did not see them clearly, yet she sensed the coordinated stillness of bodies positioned just out of sight, watching. For the slightest misstep, Adrian remained beside her, posture composed, shoulders squared not in aggression but in leadership, and when he finally turned his head toward the forest edge his voice carried with quiet authority. "You have seen enough," he said, not loudly, yet the sound traveled cleanly through the clearing. "Step forward." For a moment nothing happened. Then shadows shifted between the trees and 3 figures emerged into partial light. Each tall, each alert, their eyes reflecting a sharp intensity that made Clara's pulse quicken despite her effort to remain steady. They did not look at her first. They looked at Adrian. It was not fear in their gaze. It was challenge. The ground moved. One of them said, voice firm but controlled. It answered her. Clara felt the accusation in the words, even though they were not directed at her. Adrian did not deny it. Yes, he replied. The admission rippled through the clearing like a second tremor. The figures shifted slightly, tension visible in the line of their shoulders. Then the rumors were true, another said. The human carries the key. Clara resisted the urge to react to the word human spoken as classification rather than identity. Instead, she stepped forward half a pace, aligning herself deliberately rather than hiding behind Adrian's presence. I am not a key, she said evenly. I am a scientist. The statement sounded almost fragile against the weight of ancient territory, yet she held her ground. The first figure's gaze finally moved to her, sharp and assessing. Your father said the same, he replied. The mention of Thomas Whitmore shifted the air again. Clara felt her heartbeat stumble. You knew him, she said. We knew of him, the figure corrected. He stood where you stand. He believed he could prevent escalation. Clara swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. And did he? A brief silence followed, heavier than before. Adrian answered instead. For a time. The forest vibrated faintly, the hum beneath the earth rising and settling as though responding to the tension above it. Clara sensed something building, not confrontation exactly, but divergence. Two possible futures waiting to split apart. If the core responds to her, the second figure said, eyes never leaving Clara, then she cannot return untouched. Knowledge spreads. Influence follows. Clara felt the implication clearly now. They were not debating her presence. They were debating her containment. Adrian's voice lowered. Not in secrecy, but in command. She will not be contained, he said. The authority in his tone was unmistakable, and the figures shifted subtly, acknowledging the weight behind his words even if they did not agree. Clara realized then that this was more than a territorial dispute. It was internal fracture. Factions measuring not just her, but him. If you believe balance has chosen sides, Adrian continued, then understand this. Balance does not choose through fear. It chooses through alignment. His gaze flickered toward Clara briefly, steady and resolute. And I will not allow this moment to become the spark your suspicion seeks. The hum beneath the clearing steadied again, softer but firm, as though the forest itself listened. Clara felt the gravity of what was unfolding settle into her bones. She was no longer an observer of history. She was a variable within it. And as the figures retreated half a step, not in surrender but in reconsideration, she understood that the next decision would not be forced by threat. It would be shaped by trust, or the absence of it. Trust, Clara realized, was not declared in speeches or sealed in documents. It was built in moments like this, when tension could tip toward division and someone chose restraint instead. The three figures at the edge of the clearing did not step closer again, but neither did they fully retreat. They watched Adrian with measured expectation, and they watched her with something sharper, something that weighed consequence rather than curiosity. The hum beneath the earth softened to a steady rhythm, no longer escalating, no longer flaring, as though the core itself waited for the next word to define its meaning. Clara drew a slow breath and allowed herself to look directly at the one who had spoken of containment. My father believed escalation could be prevented, she said evenly. If you believe I carry what he discovered, then understand this. I am not here to expose this place. I am here to understand it. The forest seemed to absorb her words. One of the figures shifted slightly, uncertainty flickering across his expression. Understanding does not stop ambition, he replied. No, Clara agreed quietly. But secrecy does not stop fear. The statement lingered, delicate but firm. Adrian did not interrupt her. He stood beside her without overshadowing her presence, silver eyes steady, as if measuring the impact of every syllable she chose. The sky above the clearing had begun to shift, late afternoon light filtering through branches in long gold streaks, and Clara became acutely aware of time moving forward whether they resolved this fracture or not. Somewhere beyond the ridge, her research team would be wondering why her signal had gone dark. Two worlds, both waiting for explanation. If I return without answers, she continued, others will come with different intentions. Not because I asked them to. Because uncertainty invites intrusion. The figures exchanged glances. They understood that truth as well as she did. Adrian's voice lowered, not in secrecy, but in quiet command. She is correct, he said. Isolation has preserved us for 3 decades. It will not preserve us for 3 more if curiosity turns into suspicion. The hum beneath the clearing pulsed once, deeper than before, then settled again. Clara felt it resonate through her spine, not as warning, but as affirmation. The first figure exhaled slowly. Then what do you propose? He asked, though his gaze remained fixed on Adrian. Clara answered before Adrian could. Transparency without surrender, she said. Collaboration without exploitation. My father tried to shield this place alone. That is why he became vulnerable. Silence followed, heavy with history. Adrian turned slightly toward her, and in his expression she saw not surprise, but recognition. You would stand between both worlds, he said softly. Clara met his gaze without hesitation. I already am. The wind moved through the trees once more, no longer tense, but carrying the faint scent of rain on distant air. The figures at the edge of the clearing stepped back at last, not in defeat, but in reluctant acknowledgement that this moment would not ignite into conflict. As they disappeared into shadow, the clearing felt wider, the pressure easing just enough for Clara to breathe fully again. Adrian remained beside her, close enough that she could sense the quiet steadiness in his presence. This is only the beginning, he said. Clara looked down at the stone circle, at the place where her father had once stood, and then back at him. Then let us make sure it does not end the same way. Above them, the last light of day shifted toward dusk, and beneath their feet the core pulsed in quiet alignment, as though marking not the choice of a side, but the start of a new equation neither world had yet solved.